Nigeria's Joint Admissions and Matriculation Board, JAMB, on Tuesday cancelled general cutoff marks for admission into tertiary institutions. The board therefore allowed tertiary institutions the freedom to set their individual minimum benchmarks for admission. The board took the decision at the 2021 policy meeting, which was held virtually and chaired by the Minister of Education, Malam Adamu. The stakeholders also approved, as of October 29, 2021, the deadline for the closure of amendments for 2021 admission. So I want to talk about the impact here with Abayomi Fawehinmi, who's an entrepreneur and human resources professional. Yomi, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So how do we assess this decision? What is the impact of allowing different institutions the freedom to set their own cutoff marks?
Okay, thank you for having me. Good morning, Reuters, and thanks, viewers. It is an interesting development after 40 years of where we have had centralized forms of cutoff marks for universities and higher institutions. This is an interesting departure. The excuses that JAMB gave was because the universities came up with various cutoff marks. Interestingly, that has always been the case. So the question to ask is that what's different this time? From time immemorial, the cutoff marks of universities have been higher than College of Education and Polytechnics. Even in the university, the cutoff marks of the federal universities or the proposed cutoff marks from federal universities have always been higher than the ones the private universities bring in. So over the years, there's always been that challenge of balancing it. But what that policy commission did, because what happened before was that it was government that determined that minimum. But what the JAMB registrar did that was different, it started a couple of years back, was to call all the schools together, the over 700 schools involved in this admission process, because it's not just universities, it's over 600 schools, right? It calls all of them together and then they agree commonly on a minimum. Now, so what he has done this year is that he has also called them together, but refused to agree to a minimum, and that's my own concern. One, I like the fact that it reinforces the law that establishes our university that grants them autonomy in terms of admission, because by university laws, the university senate is the admission agency, not JAMB. The role of JAMB is only to be a ranking examination. So the responsibility for admission criteria selection is in the hands of the university. So what this has done, as is puts it, is that's taking it back there. However, the challenge is that don't we need some form of check? Don't we need some form of balancing? Don't we see some sort of oversight to ensure that some schools don't go way below? Because even the JAMB registrar said it yesterday that some schools already do play under the table in terms of getting people admitted. So what will likely happen is that you're going to hear schools now, in a bid to get more people to come in, start to lower the cutoff mark. I won't be surprised if you start to hear universities that start to admit people that scored 10 over 400 or 25 over 400 or 30 over 400 to read some classes. As you well know, based on the selection and the admission pattern in that, some departments don't get enough students just because of the high cutoff mark. What will likely happen is that universities will drop those cutoff marks and bring in more people into those departments. I won't be surprised if I hear that university pegs its cutoff mark at last year we stopped at 160. I hope we will not get universities that will peg their cutoff mark at 80 over 400, and that would be very, very dangerous at the end of the day. So it's good for university autonomy. It reinforces the law that establishes a university, but it can potentially lead to an erosion of the quality of people we get into our institutions.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. And I'm glad, and we're looking at some proposals here. The registrar of JAMB, Professor Isaac Oloyede, said that he got some of these proposals from the schools. And you've already thank you for taking us through the process where you say they get together with 600, 700 or so schools and they all agree. So University of Maiduguri, they suggested 150, Lagos State University 190, Covenant Private University 190. Why do you think they couldn't agree? I mean, is it because there were just too many players involved with respect to too many proposals? They couldn't take an average? Why do you think they couldn't agree?
Well, 2 years ago, when they had this conference, I think they had it in Eden, in Osun State, they had an agreement. I mean, it was exactly about the same number. I mean, we have only had less than 100 higher institutions in the last 1-2 years. So it's still this number that gathered in Eden. And there was an agreement on the rate. However, Immediately after the meeting, some private universities particularly came out to say they did not agree with it. Remember, it's a consensus decision making based on consensus, right? So some people will not like it, but they left that meeting with a minimum. But I remember particularly Are Afe Babalola, the proprietor of Afe Babalola University, came out clearly and spoke against it. And I remember also that Dr. Ruben Abati, I think was part of that process, wrote an article to say, hey, we were all there and we all agreed by consensus. So when they go to that meeting and they have an agreement, some people don't believe that's the best thing to do. And then they come out to say, well, why we all agreed, but this is my view. So I suspect that is what JAMB is trying to do. But I feel that JAMB is shying away from his responsibility. I feel he's also being afraid to take decision is as dangerous as taking a bad decision. I think as a country, we need to have a minimum standard for people that will get into our institutions. I feel that JAMB failed the country by not insisting on a minimum mark. I don't care whether the minimum mark is 10 or 20 or 50 or whatever. I mean, the minimum mark, when I wrote at JAMB, it will be unheard of that somebody gets his admission to study engineering if he didn't score a minimum of 200 plus, I mean, many years ago. But we reduced it to 180 under Professor, trying to remember her name now, the former minister. Then we reduced it to 160. So we have been reducing it over the year. So the question is, if a university comes and says, I want mine to be 110 or 115, why not? Why can't we still agree on a minimum? And that's one challenge, again, that we need to have as a country. We must have minimum standard. I mean, we can't just leave standards the way they are. Now, let me also mention, so that we can balance this conversation very well, that the criteria for gaining admission to Nigerian universities and polytechnic institutions is the WAEC or NECO or NAPTEP. JAMB is only a ranking examination. The basis for getting admission is either your NECO, your WAEC, or your NAPTEP. So if you have had your 5 credits in those subjects, you are qualified. But to rank people, that's where there is JAMB. So what it seems JAMB is trying to say is that fall back on how those people perform and set any mark they have. But hey, what is going to happen is that we're going to throw standards to the bush. I wish the media, and thanks for bringing this up, the next day after the decision was taken, will follow up to check those universities. I know a universities 2 years ago that the total number of people that applied to that university were just 10.
Wow.
I didn't say those that got admission. I'm saying 10 people, 1, 2, 3, 10 people applied in the whole country. Out of the over 1.8 million people that wrote JAMB, only 10 applied to a university.
Wow.
Now, my question you're going to ask me, what do you think that university is going to do now? Maybe it has grown from 10 to 15 or to 25 or 30 or 100, whatever may be the case. That university is going to just throw its door open, and you'll start seeing people coming to study medicine who had, or engineering or education, who only had 50 over 400. That's what's going to happen at the end of the day.
Prof, just a minute to go. What is your take on the sentiment of the relevance of JAMB going forward, since you mentioned those other bodies?
Yeah, Brutus, that's a very important question. You know, the first word in that thing called JAMB is joint. Yesterday, JAMB refused to jointly take a decision. So from their word, from their name, that joint should go. Because if that doesn't happen. Number 2, the second word in their name is admission. Has JAMB facilitated admission to our institutions? No. In 2010, excess of 20% of admission spaces were not taken by Nigerian schools. So you have a case where you have 1.8, 1.7 billion people.
Thanks, Prof. We got to continue this conversation, Prof. Great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Abayomi Fawehinmi, entrepreneur and human resources manager, talking about the matters with JAMB exiting cutoff marks.